There was once a coastal town, quiet and ordinary, resting beside the sea. Its people woke each morning to the sound of waves touching the shore. Their homes faced the water. Their boats were pulled up onto the sand. Fishing was not just their work, it was their life. Generations had grown up learning the rhythm of the tide, the patience of the net, the waiting that comes with living by the sea. Allah had given them stability, food, and a clear path. They were not ignorant people. They were from the children of Israel, a community that had already witnessed miracles before, a people who knew what divine guidance meant. Allah gave them a command. It was simple: one day of rest, one boundary not to cross, the Sabbath. On that day, they were told to step away from worldly gain and turn their focus toward worship. 6 days were open to them, 6 days to fish, trade, and work. 1 day was reserved, not as punishment, but as discipline, not to deprive them, but to remind them that provision does not come from effort alone. It comes from obedience. At first, they obeyed. On the Sabbath, nets stayed dry, boats remained tied. The sea was watched, not touched. The town slowed down. People gathered for worship. Life felt balanced. But then the test deepened. Something changed in the sea itself. On the Sabbath, fish began appearing in large numbers. They swam close to the shore, visible, abundant, almost inviting. On the other days, it was as if the sea itself was watching them. Day after day, the people noticed the pattern: fish on the forbidden day, absence on the permitted days. The test was no longer abstract. It was visible. It pressed against their desire. They stood on the shore and watched opportunity pass by, and inside their hearts, something began to shift. Questions formed. Why would Allah allow this? Why test us like this? We are not doing anything wrong by wanting to survive. Slowly, obedience began to feel like loss. Restraint began to feel unfair. And instead of strengthening their faith, the test revealed what was already hidden inside. Some among them did not want to openly disobey. They still feared being seen as sinners, but they wanted the benefit. So they looked for a way around the command, not rebellion, but manipulation, not defiance, but deception. They dug channels near the shore. They placed traps in the water before the Sabbath. On Friday, everything was set. On Saturday, the fish swam freely into the channels and were caught without human hands touching them. On Sunday, the people returned and collected what had already been trapped. They told themselves they had obeyed the law. "We did not fish on the Sabbath," they said. "We only collected afterward." In their minds, they had found a loophole. But divine law is not a contract written to be exploited. Allah does not judge appearances alone. He judges intention, and intention had already been corrupted. The town slowly changed. What began as a few quiet actions spread. Others followed. The practice became normal. The sin became routine. And then something more dangerous happened. The community divided. There were those who committed the deception. There were those who warned them. And there were those who stayed silent. The warners spoke up. They said, "Fear Allah. Stop before it is too late. Do not trick what you cannot escape." They reminded them that obedience means sincerity, not cleverness. But their words were met with mockery. "Why do you waste your breath?" the silent ones said. "Allah will destroy them anyway if He wants. Leave them alone. Why involve yourselves?" This silence mattered, because when wrongdoing becomes public, silence becomes a position. The town was no longer unified by faith. It was fractured by attitude. One group justified the sin. One group resisted it. One group detached themselves from responsibility. And then the night came. There was no storm, no fire, no earthquake, no warning signs in the sky. The sea was calm. The town slept as usual. But something irreversible was already in motion. When dawn arrived, the streets were quiet, too quiet. Doors opened slowly. People stepped outside and froze. Faces had changed. Bodies had changed. Those who had deceived the command were no longer human. They had been transformed into monkeys, alive, conscious, humiliated. They recognized their families, but they could not speak. They could not return to their previous lives. Their bodies reflected what their hearts had already become, mimicking obedience without sincerity, acting without truth, reduced to instinct. The punishment was not hidden. It was public, it was deliberate, and it was limited in time. They lived only a short while after that. Then they died, but the lesson did not die with them. Allah describes this punishment clearly. It was not destruction by water or fire. It was transformation. A punishment meant to shame, not just to erase. A sign for those who came after. This story was never about fish. It was about obedience. It was about whether faith is followed when it costs something. Whether restraint is maintained when temptation is strongest. Whether people obey the spirit of a command, not just the letter. Ahqaf did not deny Allah openly. They did not abandon belief. They tried something subtler. They tried to outsmart divine law. And that is why their punishment was unique. Because deception is more dangerous than rebellion. It hides inside justification. It feels intelligent. It feels safe. Allah did not need to destroy their city. He turned them into a warning. This story is preserved because it repeats itself in different forms. When people follow rules only when convenient. When morality becomes a technicality. When faith becomes a performance. The form changes. The outcome does not. The Qur'an does not tell this story to scare without purpose. It tells it to reveal a truth that Allah does not judge effort alone. He judges honesty. That obedience without sincerity is hollow. That clever excuses do not protect anyone. The sea that tempted them still exists. The mindset that destroyed them still exists. The question remains the same. Will people obey when no one is watching? Will they stop when stopping costs something? Ahqaf were not destroyed by natural disaster. They were exposed, and exposure was enough. If you are listening carefully, this story is not ancient history. It is a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable because they show us what we prefer to ignore.